Hi, everybody. It's Kevin and with my great friend, Steve Wells. Hey, Steve.
Hi, Kevin, and hi, everyone out there. Great to be here with you.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about one of my least favorite subjects, which is politics. And I say least favorite because in the past, I would call myself a political cynic. I was somebody who thought that the political process didn't really serve the people. It was based on lobbies and big business, and yet now I'm feeling a little bit more connected to the process. Steve, are you feeling the same way that this is we're starting to look at uncharted territory in terms of the political process?
Well, it's interesting for me to watch it. It's actually kind of entertaining.
Yeah.
I have to work at not getting entangled in it, having too strong of an opinion, but I have to say it's definitely very intensely dramatic and it just draws me right in. And so, um, it's not particularly pleasant, but at the same time, it's like watching a street fight or something. You can't help but just kind of watch just because it's so captivating.
It is captivating. That's a great word for it. Of course, on the Democratic side, we've got a huge number of candidates with significantly different views on things, and don't need to really say anything more on the Republican side of things because it's a one horse show. I don't mean to use the word horse derogatorily, but it is that. Uh, and and I didn't say a particular part of the horse. I just said a horse. So let's just keep that in mind
We'll,
as
we'll
well.
let people fill that part in for themselves.
Hey. So as a starting point here, Steve, I just want to say that it's important for us, even in these heated political times, to be respectful of each other's opinions as to where they stand in the political process and who they care about as far as candidates and issues and things like that. And I know that you and I are sort of on that same page, but I would urge everyone to sort of take that bit of a non-judgmental view on it because it's certainly one of those heated topics that you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table, but we're going to talk about it here between you and me. And so I'm going to bring up a few questions to you, and you bring up a few to me. And I'm going to start with asking you, Steve, do you think that the current political situation reflects an increase in consciousness that humanity is undergoing, specifically the shift? How do you feel that relates?
Well, my first temptation, and I think a lot of people's would be to say, we're going backwards. We're going down to the lower vibrations. We're heading for the pits. And that everything that we've gained over centuries in terms of increased in consciousness is down the drain, and we're heading back down. Um, the real human part of me looks at it like that, but as I step back, I believe that it's all appropriately part of the process of our increase in consciousness, and it's something that needs to take place. It what it's doing is it's forcing us in one way or another, or it's at least pressuring us to really get a feel for, get an understanding for where do we stand on these things. Whereas before it was a bit easier to just kind of let it, ignore it. It's more in our faces than ever. And I think that it's part of the shift that we're seeing this intense polarization, even though it doesn't seem like that.
Yeah.
So that's the way I see it.
Yeah. Do you think politics is going through a dark night of the soul?
That's an interesting way to put it. Dark Night, anyway. I'm not sure Dark Night of the Soul, but definitely a dark night. And yeah, I think it's of humanity's soul. So that might even be a good way to look at it.
Yeah. So the next question I have for you, Steve, is that do you think it's irresponsible for somebody in today's society to totally ignore politics and the political system? In other words, not to vote or not to listen to world news and be invested in it from that standpoint. Is it irresponsible? Would you use that term?
I wouldn't use that term, even though for me personally, uh, it's important for me. I feel like it's important for me to at least be somewhat tuned into what's going on and to actually cast a vote. Now, granted, I don't invest a lot of time and energy. Sometimes I even feel guilty about not spending enough time and energy and knowing local elections and people who are running and platforms and issues. When it comes to the presidential election, I always vote. I am question within me as to how much value it is that I do that. But I think it was kind of inbred in me since I was a child that you really need to vote. You're, you make a difference as an individual. And though I question how much the vote may provide, I do believe that we as individuals do make a difference in terms of our consciousness and what happens within us. So, and I think that's the most important part. And therefore, if someone chooses to totally disengage from what's going on around them politically and not to vote, I think that that's not a bad thing, because really, as said, the most important thing is what's going on in your own consciousness, what's happening in your own battlefield, as it may be. Have you reconciled within yourself these opposing viewpoints and forces? And that's where the work really needs to be done, and where humanity and the shift is best served.
Yeah. So I'm one of those people, Steve, that in the past has been very disconnected from the political process. My belief has been that politics doesn't serve the individual, and therefore I have felt inauthentic by voting for somebody, especially in a situation where I'm being sort of forced to vote for the least worst candidate between a couple of candidates. And my belief is that a president typically doesn't have a tremendous amount of power to enact change. It's sort of like when we were in middle school and running for student council, and I would say, hey, free candy in everyone's locker at the end of the day, and 1 extra hour for lunch, and recess for everyone on Fridays, and vote for me and you'll get all this stuff. And everybody, of course, would vote for me. And the reality is I couldn't actually make any of that happen, but it sounded good to everyone. So I would get elected as student council president. So I kind of feel like on a grander scale, that's sort of what happens in the major political races. But that feeling is changing somewhat in me, and I do feel a little bit more that my vote might count, as we're seeing some of the changes in the political landscape. And I'm hoping that cynicism that I've always had kind of goes away, and that I can actually see a value to the system as supporting and representing us as a people. So,
yeah, well said.
So speaking of that, I was a big supporter of Marianne Williamson, who I consider to be a fairly enlightened person. And I was really excited to see her having a voice in this presidential race. And of course, she's now bowed out. She didn't have enough support, can't continue her campaign. But my question to you, Stephen, I know you also were interested in her platform. When do you think the right time is for a candidate like that? Someone who is more embracing of the shift and more aware consciously of where we're going, especially as a female. When do you see the right time being for a candidate like that to gain traction and potentially become president of the United States?
Well, my first gut reaction or response to that is last year. I am more than ready for a candidate like that to be elected and to be in office. When do I think it can actually happen practically? I don't know. I mean, quite honestly, when I listened to Marianne and what she had to offer and what she would do as president, Um, I loved what she had. You know,
Yeah.
if we could have someone that like that in office that people would listen to and absorb and align with, our world would be a totally different place.
Yeah.
But would I have actually voted for her? That's another question that I probably have to say no. And the reason for that is because my feeling is that my vote would have been thrown away. There are too many, she's too fringe, even though
Yeah.
I'm very aligned with her. I wouldn't be a good president either for the same reason. And no one would vote for me for the same reason.
Steve, I would vote for you in a heartbeat. Please
Okay,
run.
so I need to qualify that. Almost nobody, almost nobody would vote for me for the same reason. And, you know, the practical part of me says, well, I want to get someone in there that is going to be able to work with the system that we have right now and bring in people from both sides of the aisle, conservative, liberal, and get them to work together. I just can't see Marianne as having been able to successfully do that. And so as for when will that happen, my guess is it's going to be at least a couple, if not more, presidential election cycles in the future.
So, Steve, I mean, what you're saying then is are you okay with voting for the least crappy candidate in a political system? I mean, that's the way it seems like it's been over the last, anyway, for a while. I mean, I'm going to admit it right here on camera. I voted Libertarian last time. I knew that as I was filling in that form that that vote was going to be meaningless. And some people would say, "Oh, that was a vote for Trump. You know, you never should have done that." The fact is, I decided going into the poll that I was going to vote authentically with who I would like to see as president, not who I would like to see defeating somebody else as president. And so there's two different ways of looking at this. And I can't bring myself to vote for somebody who I like, you know, a little bit more than someone who I really dislike. And
No,
so,
you mean dislike a little bit less, right?
okay, whatever. I can't even say it the right way, but it's that kind of thing. I just feel like I'm being hypocritical by entering into a system that I don't really believe in the first place, and then voting for someone I don't really believe in after that. Although I have to say that the Libertarian Party does a sucky job of putting candidates out there that I still don't even really truly believe in. So F what I just said, because I didn't really like the guy anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I have to admit that I have taken the tack that you object to, and that's voting defensively, voting for someone that I don't really care to have in office just because I'd rather have them than the worst guy. And, you know, that's playing a strategy game, and I don't like it. But at the same time, the practical part of me says, don't throw
yeah.
away your vote. I mean, there's something at stake here that's a value to you.
Yeah.
And we won't go into that in great detail, but there is something at stake there that's a value to me. That's why
No,
I
I know. I'm just looking for the nearest trash can so I can throw my vote into it. So,
do. Yeah, they're not hard to find.
oh my God. So, hey, Steve, do you happen to have any questions for me?
No, I do. In fact, I have a few questions for you, Kevin. I need to do you ample service in repayment for what you've done for me.
Oh, thank you so much.
So let me ask you a few questions as well. So this one is really kind of an edgy question. It's a bit provocative, but I'd be interested to hear what you and others would have to say about it. So are Democrats or liberals, as you may also classify them, of higher consciousness than conservatives or Republicans? I mean, you're kind of dividing along the same lines here, in my mind, when you say conservative, Republican, liberal, Democrat. So what do you think?
Well, first of all, I somewhat rail against making a judgment about any person based on their political affiliation, because if we're trying to unify the planet and unify humanity, making judgments and categorizing people as one thing or the other thing doesn't really help in that regard. I will say that Democratic Party tends to put forward people and potential candidates that seem to not necessarily be mainstream. And when I use the word mainstream, I'm thinking of the term old energy, because our political system is just filled with old energy. It's an old energy system. And so part of me says, no, it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. It's the system that needs to change. It's the energy within the system that needs to change. It needs to move from old energy to new energy if we're ever going to see any kind of change in that system itself. I see the potential possibly more so with Democrats, because they're willing to put out candidates like Mayor Pete, who's gay, and women, although the Republicans have put out women candidates as well. So you can't necessarily base things on that. So my general thought is no, not necessarily a higher consciousness in the Democratic side than the Republican side. Maybe today, with the president who we have in office today versus the Democrats that are in the field. But again, that could change at any particular point. So I don't think you can draw a definitive line between Democrats or Republicans that way. How do you feel?
Well, it's interesting. I think that there are certain tendencies, liberal tendencies, that have the appearance of being higher vibrational, more inclusive, less separative is my sense about it, more willing to help out the fellow man. That's kind of a generality, but at the same time, the conservatives and the Republican Party tend to have a higher consciousness perspective. What I might say is that of being able to say, let's not have so much regulation. Let's not have so much government. Let's be self-regulating, which is really a higher consciousness perspective in a way, even though it can fall apart in a lower consciousness society. So
that's a really good point, Steve. That's a really good point. And I think people lose sight of that sometimes. And the idea that Republicans, and it used to be different. It used to be the opposite back in the old days. The Democrats believed in small central government and more powerful state governments. And that's kind of flipped nowadays. And I know I like that concept, Steve, and that's something I think people should keep in mind, that there could be a higher vibration aspect to republicanism, which is taking kind of a beating right now from the New Agers.
Yeah, well, and really that's one reason why I've considered myself unaffiliated, because there are some things that the Republican and conservatives proffer and consider valuable that I see of value and of a higher consciousness intention or direction, and that's one of them. There are some others too. So I can't say blanketly one way or the other. I actually see aspects of each that can be higher consciousness. You really can't categorize blanketly like that.
Dude, I love you for that. That's so non-judgmental and seeing both sides of the coin. And I wish more people could do that, bud. Tip of the cap.
All right. So let's see. One more question for you here. No, maybe a couple more. Is the Trump presidency helping to propel consciousness forward in the shift, or is it slowing it down?
Wow. Can't we go back to my favorite breakfast cereal? I mean, I really enjoy easy questions like that. That's a tough one, because my feeling, Steve, is that because we voted Trump into office, we were essentially asking for business not as usual with politics, and the old way of doing things in the political system had to be shaken up. I kind of feel like we went to the far extreme in order to make that point when we voted Trump into office. And I think ultimately we'll get back to a balance point at some point. But I think oftentimes in order to gain that balance point, we need to go to an extreme in order to get there. And so potentially I see, yeah, the big lesson learned by the vote in of Trump is that we don't need an old energy, old school politician to run the country. You could run it, Steve. I could run it. In fact, I think we do a pretty good job, and I would urge us maybe next time in 2024 to run for president and vice president.
Form will be all the candy and double recesses and all that stuff that you did.
Yes, you got it. We're doing it. So yeah, I think it could be viewed as being a benefit ultimately, but we're not going to understand that until it's hindsight.
Good way to put it. Yeah, I mean, I think that for most people that are awakened or awakening, the Trump presidency is a source of pain. To
put it mildly.
But at the same time, I think, like you say, it's serving an important purpose that is largely beyond my vision. But at the same time, I do think that it is providing us with an example of someone who is not mainstream, deeply entrenched political, historically political person with all the rigidity that goes along with it. Well, he kind of breaks that mold, and if nothing else, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm coming from on that, Steve.
Yeah. So, okay, one more question for you. Is it possible to bring us back together? So we have, in my perspective, is a more polarized, more separated electorate than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and that's a lot of years. Is it possible? What does the future hold for us? Are we going to be able to come back together, or is it just going to continue to split further?
Super great question. The optimist in me says yes. The realist says yes, but it's going to take a whole lot longer than we would ever expect, and we're not going to be around to see it. But the political system as it is today, Steve, it's a lot like the Super Bowl. People root for one side or the other, and they get all emotional about their team and wanting to support their team and have a vested interest in what's happening. The reality is that those people watching the Super Bowl have very little to do with the outcome of what happens in that Super Bowl. My Libertarian and Green Party candidates are like the band playing in the stands that are sort of the background noise. They're never going to affect what's going on the field, but they're you can kind of hear something going on from them, but they're sort of meaningless in that whole thing. But I do see the fact that more of us are shifting, Steve, and you would have to agree with that. And there's more feminine energy out there that's driving our movement into this higher consciousness. And I think we're seeing it in this particular presidential race. I think we're going to see it more and more as time goes on. I think we're seeing it in congressional races. This just can't be something that happens in a presidential race. It's got to happen grassroots wise, not only just in Congress, but even at the state level. And we are seeing that. And so the big stage is for the presidency. But it's the smaller stages where I think we're starting to see victories happen for progressive people and people that are shifting. And ultimately, that's going to make its way up into the presidential races as well. So I do see that happening. And maybe someday we'll have more than just two viable candidates, a Democrat or Republican. We'll have 4 or 5 different viable candidates running for presidency. And I think we'll hopefully going to see more harmony between those different candidates down the road. That's Kevin's optimistic view. What do you think?
Similar, unsurprisingly. I think that we can't help but do better than what we're doing now in terms of separation. And if the shift is indeed happening, which I firmly believe it is, and we are awakening as a humanity, the time will come eventually. Will it be in my lifetime? I would hope so. That we'll come together and live more harmoniously. That just the nature of the shift and the vector that we're on says that it's got to happen eventually. Who knows when?
I would wonder, Steve, if the millennials are more accepting of a blurring of the line between Democrat and Republican, and if it's really kind of old energy, old people who are maintaining the hard edge between the two of those, and basically we just need to be dying off in order to allow the millennials to come forward.
Let's get us out of here so we can make some progress.
Well, sometimes I think that's, I think that sometimes might be the necessary thing in order to get real change to happen. There's a point at which, Steve, that the old guard gives way to the new guard, and we're in the process of that. The whole OK Boomer movement is a sign of that process where the old guard is getting older and being pushed out by the new guard. And I would hope that the millennials and the ones coming, slightly before and after them are going to be more progressive and more accepting of the new energy and the shift and making the changes in the political system that truly get it back to a point where it's serving the people like it should be. I'm getting off my soapbox now.
Yeah, no, that sounded beautiful. It like cotton candy and fluffy clouds, and it makes me feel really good. I can only hope.
Yeah,
thank you, because it does.
2 hours of recess for you.
Yeah. No, I'm with you entirely, and I do see that, and I do think the answer is in the younger generation. They are more conscious. They came in with a higher consciousness, and I think it's going to be upon them to make these changes.
Yeah, and I hope I get to see some of that before I pass on and actually join them in the new life.
Agreed.
Okay. Steve, we've probably talked for an hour and a half on this subject, but it's fascinating, and it causes emotion, and it's such a big topic, especially right now. And thanks for joining me. And I just want to invite everybody to join in with their viewpoints on things, and do it with knowing that there's no judgment at all. That we appreciate everyone's comments and hopefully stir some lively debate.
Yeah, it's great. It's fun to share all these ideas. If we can do it open-mindedly and with consideration for each other, it's really not just something that we need to do to come together, but it's actually fun. I enjoy it.
Fun is a great word. All right, buddy. Well, listen, thanks for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you again soon.
See you. Bye, everyone.